Hey guys, John Polemy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today is Saturday, December 21st, 2019. This week I intend to flip the script a bit and have a little fun, although this is pretty serious also. This is my 2020 predictions video, if you will. I'm going to go over some themes that I'm looking at or some expectations that I have for next year. And we'll talk about it a little bit. Some of them are going to be controversial. Just because I say that I think something's going to happen doesn't mean I want it to happen or I think it's a good idea that it happens. But this is, we have to have a thesis or a view of where we think things are going in our world model, in our way that this universe that we live in exists, so that we can properly forecast or look for opportunities to place capital. So with that, and a caveat from the great Yankees catcher and quote giver, Yogi Berra, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. And I wanted to get this out before the holidays. A lot of people in the investment markets, you'll start seeing now, forecasters, pundits, end of the year issues and podcasts, videos, things on TV, and also what people are going to think for 2020. I wanted to get my thoughts out there as quickly as possible, just so I wouldn't get caught in all the information overload, but also that I wouldn't be accused of stealing other people's ideas. So having said that, let's get started. First major prediction I have is what I call Trumpslide 2020. I believe that the president, if the economy stays positive, I'm caveating this, and the stock market does not crash in 2020, that Trump should be reelected, and reelected actually in greater numbers than he was in 2016. Why do I say that? Well, people vote with their pocketbooks. Yes, they have issues around guns and abortion and all these little issues, secondary issues, but in the end, am I doing good? Do I have a job? Do I feel like we're going in the right direction? Do I feel like my life is good or getting better? That's how the majority of people vote. Now, there are hardcore 25 to 30% on each side that are never going to change regardless. They're going to vote straight party line. They don't care. But that 40% in the middle, that 40 to 50% in the middle is going to be swayed by some of these. Now, a lot of people don't like the president's mannerisms. They don't like how he conducts himself. They say he's unfit for office. But when they go into that voting booth, are they going to want to vote for a stumbled mum like Joe Biden, who appears to be in the early stages of dementia? If you watch his videos, it's very sad that he's up there. I'm reminded what President Obama told him before he announced his candidacy. You don't have to do this, Joe. And you will note that the president has not endorsed, or the former president, Barack Obama, has not endorsed Joe Biden. So then you start going down the cast of characters. Elizabeth Warren, she's dropping in the polls now because she's just, you can't, this far left, Bernie still has leftover, but he's used up too. He's going on 80 years old. He didn't win last time. I mean, it's really going to be a mess in the Democratic Party. There's a possibility of a brokered convention and somebody getting, super delegates. I mean, it's just a mess. And I don't see people going into against Trump if the economy stays good and the market is still up, with their platform being, we want to raise everybody's taxes and cancel 120 million people's private insurance and have everybody go on Medicare for all. I just don't see that that's not a vision that the majority of people in this country are going to find appealing. And there's just no charisma on the Democratic side. I mean, I hate to say this, but our politics are very visual. They're media-centric. They are, whether you like it or not, entertaining for a large group of people in the country. They don't see it as serious as maybe I do or some of these listeners do, and it is entertaining. And Trump is a showman. Trump knows how to get a crowd whipped up. I mean, you can just see everywhere he goes, he gets 25 or 30,000 people or packed arenas. So you may not like it. I may not like it, but I think that's what probably will happen. I think what's also interesting is to watch the Senate. I think will probably stay in Republicans' hands. And you have about 30 House members that are in districts that Trump won. They may be at risk because of this impeachment. This impeachment thing is not popular. It's not going to get through the Senate. It's going to be dismissed. Trump wants to drag it out as long as possible because he wants his day in court. He wants to call Biden's son. He wants to get all this. He really wants to jam it down the Democrats' throat, which he will be able to do, because it's not going to be like the House. This is actual. We're evident in the Senate. It's an actual trial type situation, and you call witnesses and you go over evidence, and that's how it goes. I think the Senate Republicans would rather just dismiss it, take a cursory look at, dismiss it as fast as possible, and move on. But we'll see. But that's my first major prediction, and that will have serious implications for the country. I think that if Trump wins again, the left will just go completely nuts, literally. I think they will be in the streets. I think if the economy does start to tip over during his regime, I mean, we're really heading for like a Weimar Germany situation here in this country over the next decade or two. I'm just not that positive on just the social fabric, and the current divide just keeps getting worse and worse. So that's for down the line. We can talk about that later, but that's my political forecast for the United States. I would also, people don't pay attention, at least in the U.S., as much of what's going around the world. We're seeing more and more populist politicians increasing around the world, and I don't think people are paying attention to that trend. I mean, you're even seeing in places where we thought were stable, like Chile in South America, demonstrations in the streets. It's just everywhere. So I think people are fed up with the post-war neoliberal model. At least a good portion of them are. And they're taking it to the streets. You just saw what happened in the UK. The Labour Party, the liberal agenda, was completely crushed. Former Labour strongholds in the northern part of England went conservative. It's the biggest wipeout since Margaret Thatcher was elected. So I think people need to pay attention to this, because this is more of the de-evolution of globalism that's going away, more nationalism, and those things are not conducive to world trade and deflation and state stability. That's going to be inflationary, destabilizing, and inflationary in my opinion. So we need to keep an eye on that. I think oil will be an outperformer in 2020. I think the first half will not probably be good because we have major projects coming on. But I think as you get into the second part of the year, the oil price will start moving higher. So I think, we could probably see oil in the first part of the 2020, maybe get up into the low 60s. Then I think it'll probably drift back down to the low 50s again, as you see projects come on in Brazil, Guyana, and Norway. However, worldwide central bank money printing, I've talked about this before in other videos, the constant and increased amount of central bank interest rate cuts and money printing is going to form this wave of liquidity, and I believe cause nominal growth in the world next year, sufficient to increase energy price demand and prices. And then the other thing I'm looking at, and I think is, I think the U.S. shale phenomenon, if you will, boom, if you will, is bust. What we are seeing is, yes, we're going to see U.S. shale increase production, but at a decreasing rate as we go through 2020. And I think some of the assumptions that have been made by world bodies like the International Energy Agency and others on their predictions of oil supply are going to have to be revised. And once that does happen, which I believe will probably take a couple quarters into 2020, then you will see a re-rating and a new view come out that the oil supply is not going to be as robust to the upside as many have thought. And I think that could cause a sentiment change and a re-rating of oil prices higher. Because obviously, we've talked about the underinvestment in oil. We've talked about the shales masking and sucking up the oxygen in the room, not enough investment going into non-shale, non-OPEC development. And I think that that's going to manifest itself in the second half next year. So another thing I think that's probably going to begin next year, it won't be a one-year phenomenon, but I think over the next decade, and that's what I like to think about in some of these cases. What you're looking at here is a chart, the orange being the S&P 500, the purple being the Morgan Stanley index for emerging markets. And you see that basically emerging markets have went nowhere for 10 years, while the S&P has robustly outpaced the return in emerging markets. So I'm a big fan, as people know, of mean reversion. I think emerging markets are ignored by most U.S. investors, probably a lot of European investors, but not as badly as Americans. Americans are very provincial, and they really have a big home country bias. Which is, I'm not saying that's a negative thing. I'm just saying that's what it is. And what I think is happening here, with these all-time high valuations we're experiencing in the United States, I think that a lot of positives of the emerging markets have been ignored. Now, if you go back 10 years ago, yeah, you could make the argument that most, if not, of the emerging markets were kind of crapshoots. They were casinos. There was the political situations in many of these countries was, shall we say, unstable. Reforms were not forthcoming. The ability to get capital into them was small or non-existent. But that's changed in the last 10 years. I can go down the list of country after country where you have seen a new generation of leaders from the post-Cold War period. Coming out of the Cold War, you had in many of these places either remnants of a colonial infrastructure or a Soviet left-wing communist or socialism manifest or infrastructure of political leftovers. These people have been dying off or have been pushed out. You're now seeing the emergence of a younger, Western-educated, switched-on governments that are pursuing pro-reform, pro-economic reform policies that not only will but are already generating consistent above average growth. So I think maybe it doesn't happen this year, but I think that I would begin. I'm always looking to shift from areas of overvaluation to undervaluation. That's where the big returns are. And I think after 10 years, I think if you go to 2030 and we have this conversation, I think a pair trade, let's just say if I had to make one pair trade that I think is going to work out, I would go short the S&P and long this emerging markets index. Now, I'm not suggesting you do that, but if somebody asked me for one trade for the next 10 years, that's what I would say. And I think that would outperform. However, I think that if you spend a little bit of time, if you take some effort with the ubiquity of the internet now, I am able to, for example, I have conversations on Skype, via email, text, with counterparties that I do business with in all kinds of emerging and frontier markets. You can go to any major airport, Dallas, Houston, New York, Chicago. You can fly anywhere in the world, if you're willing to endure coach for, $1,500 round trip, $2,000. You can go anywhere in the world. You can go to these places. You can see them for yourself. That's what I do. I speak with a lot of people that are in these places. I do research these places. And I think that the realization is going to come, it's like they asked Willie Sutton back in the 30s. Willie Sutton was a bank robber. Willie, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. That's what his answer was. And if somebody asked me why am I so infatuated with emerging and frontier markets, it's because that's where the growth is. That's where the positive demographics are. The West is becoming old, fat, and lazy. Debt is overwhelming. We have all kinds of social problems. You go to a lot of these other places, yes, every place has problems, but they have positive demographics. The majority of the people in most of these countries are young people. They're forming families. A consumer class is being created. They're going through a generation of consumer spending and growth. When you become old and fat like me, you don't go out, you're not creating families in your 50s or 60s. You're paring back, you're selling off, you're an empty nester, you're looking to preserve your capital. That's not a recipe for growth. And I think that's where the growth is in emerging markets. And I think over the next 10 years and beginning probably this realization is going to set in. Whether it happens this year, I don't know. It will be a process of years, but I think it's a trend that you should look at and take advantage of. I mean, you can pare this down. I mean, you can just buy this, the EEM index and probably do well. But if you pare it down to specific countries and specific companies in those countries, I think you can do very well. You will certainly outperform, and it doesn't take that much effort. So that's one of my major themes, I think. And specifically to that, I think Russia will continue to outperform. People don't understand. Nobody cares about Russia. No one talks about it except for it's a boogeyman, and Putin's this evil guy that's going to infiltrate your local voting machine and skew the results towards his puppet, Donald Trump. I mean, that's really the cartoonish narrative that has kind of taken over here in the United States. It's unfortunate. But people don't understand that the Russian stock market, well, as I won't say the full stock market, but the ETF, shall we say, for Russia stocks, large caps, is up 35% this year. That's a pretty good return. And I would say that even with that return, the Russian stock market is still flat out cheap. It's probably, depending on how you want to measure it, it's probably the cheapest stock market in the entire world. And you're talking about some terrific companies that are generating tremendous returns and huge dividends. I mean, if somebody says, "Well, I can't," where does somebody put their money? They can't get a return in a savings account. I mean, you can buy Gazprom, which is the largest energy company in the world, and it's paying about an 8 or 9% dividend, and it's being forecasted it's going to raise it over the next several years. People don't pay attention. Well, while they're crooked over there, they're going to confiscate. I mean, this is in 1997. I mean, I've been to Russia. I've been to former Soviet countries. Every time I go back to it, it keeps getting better and better. The infrastructure, the modernity, the internet speeds, however you want to measure it. The trains, didn't used to have air conditioning. Now they do. I mean, little things. It just keeps getting better and better. You go to a place like St. Petersburg. There's constant upgrades. There's constant. It's just very vibrant. And I think people miss that because it gets, like I said before, I've talked about in previous videos, they have a bias sometimes. And what's that bias based on? What CNN's telling you? Get on a plane and go to St. Petersburg. You'll want to move there. I do. I think it's a wonderful place. I was there. I stay there for a month at a time, and you can't even see everything. You can't do everything. So oil is 60% of Russia's exports and 30% of its GDP. So obviously, if we think oil is going to stay around the current price or go higher, that's a boon for the Russian economy. They have a very low debt to GDP ratio. I mean, we're over 100%. They're like at 15%. I mean, everything is skewed for them. The only thing that's bad in Russia is the demographics, but they're doing things to combat that. I mean, they have a thing called hero mothers. I mean, the state has incentives for people to have children, and these mothers are celebrated. They have 4 or 5 kids. They're given a lot of subsidies. Family is very big there. These 3 stools of Russia: a strong central government, the Orthodox Church, and Russian blood and soil. I mean, that some people don't like that when they talk like that, but that's what they think, and it seems to be working for them. You actually have people emigrating there from other countries, like South African farmers, Afrikaners. I watch Russian TV and news here. You see all kinds of documentaries about people moving there from the UK, setting up farms. There's a lot of opportunity there. So I think if you go into this, I'm not saying it's perfect. It's not Wonderland. Is Putin an autocrat? Yes. Has there been politically motivated murders? Yes. It's the same situation anywhere. It's even the same here. As long as you don't try to overthrow the government, you can pretty much do what you want. I mean, you can't try to do that here. You see what happens if you try to upset the order or the way things are. Drain the swamp. You see what's happened for 3 years with the Trump administration. Okay, whether they tried to or not, you see how the status quo is not like being upset anywhere. So I think this market's going to outperform as long as the oil doesn't collapse, oil price doesn't collapse, and we don't forecast that. So, another thing is there's a huge spending bonanza going on. to help transform the economy. And a lot of it's being directed toward infrastructure. Infrastructure has that payback. 1.5 times, 2 times, 3 times, however you want to look at it. You put $100 billion into your roads, you're looking to get back, 100.5 to 200 billion back in return because of you're not busting up everybody's trucks. The efficiency of moving products increases. You can just go through the whole thing. So that's happening. So that's one of the markets that I think is going to probably do well next year. This is a big theme also that I think is being missed by everybody. I'm a big fan of the magazine cover contrarian view, if you will. This was a cover from Bloomberg Business Week back in April where it said inflation is dead. It has this Tyrannosaurus Rex that is deflating like a bouncy castle. I guess the Tyrannosaurus Rex is to be a symbol of inflation. So inflation's dying, evidently. That's what the status quo is telling us. But I just told you that globalism is being pushed back around the world. That's led to, open borders and open trade led to a disinflation, deflationary environment around the world for the last generation. And that post-World War II neoliberalism is now collapsing all over the world. Nationalism is rising, populism is rising, people wanting to protect their own, okay? People wanting to focus on their own country and not be part of the global city. You just saw what happened in the UK. I mean, are people in this much denial? And this is going to lead, I think, or be a catalyst to this happening. You're going to see part of that populism is the majority. The elites have benefited from the post-war neoliberal economic order that was put in place. That's why you have a lot of income inequality. That's why that, coupled with central bank malfeasance and creating free money so that the upper crust, the 1%, the masters of the universe, if you will, were buying everything up. And people have had enough of this now, and it's going to reverse. So you're going to see, whether you like it or not, on both sides. Trump is a manifestation of that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a manifestation of that. And you're going to see left and right-wing populism. And what that means is you could see in a second administration, you could see a guy like Trump getting support from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for a huge infrastructure bill that benefits working class and union families. Why wouldn't you? You could see that happening around the world. You could see that happening in Europe. I just pointed out what's happening in Russia with infrastructure, but the problem is we don't have any money. So where are they going to get the money? And that's when you start getting into MMT and the thought that, well, we have all this debt, we can't pay it back anyways, let's just print this money and create this infrastructure, and let's have this spending to benefit people, okay? And I'm not talking about, crony capitalism. I'm talking about, let's go out and completely redo the, interstate system. Let's completely, get all of our infrastructure that the Association of Civil Engineers says is D- in the U.S., all of our bridges. Why don't we go out and say, all of our bridges we're going to raise from D to B over the next 10 years? It would take $1 trillion. Our airports are a travesty. You go to Dubai or you go to some of these other airports around the world, I mean, you can almost live in them. I mean, I'm traveling, I'm going through Houston Hobby. I hate the place. Love Field or something like that, DFW sucks. So I think that nothing goes in the same way. Trend doesn't continue forever. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year. We're not going to have roaring inflation, but I could see by the end of this decade that's coming up, you could be back to high inflation rates, and it's going to happen because the promises that have been made, especially in the West, for pensioners, for Medicare, for all these things. You look at states like Illinois, California, New York. I mean, their pension systems are collapsed. People vote. There's going to be federal bailouts. It's going to happen. To whatever extent, I don't know. We don't have the money in the tax base, so they'll just print it. I mean, if you can't see this, I mean, I can't help you. It's just spreadsheet exercises again, guys. Go look at it. If the pensions in, you have 10,000 people going on Social Security and Medicare every day for the next 20 years, every single day. We don't have the money. So, what governments in the past have done is they have debased their currency. So I expect that to happen all around the world. It's going to be the new trend. And then you bolt on this populism, nationalism, the rollback of globalism. These were all things that helped create a low inflation uh, dynamic for the last generation. That's going to get reversed now. So that's my expectation. And then, like I said, you see these magazine covers are usually, I remember, the same thing you saw with oil back in 1997 when the Economist magazine said that, oil was dead when oil was trading at $10 a barrel. I went long uh, Petro Kazakhstan at 25 cents a share. That was my greatest trade of all time. The thing ended up going to $50 a share. So you got to look at these things. Nothing goes in the same direction forever, and I think you can make the case, a reasonable case, that inflation is going to make a comeback. And even the Federal Reserve has said that they want their 2% mandate, and they've said that they are willing to let inflation run a little bit hot to do a catch up. So what's that mean? Let inflation run at 5% a year? Even 2% inflation over your working career reduces your purchasing power by over 50%. Most people don't even know this. A lot of people listening to this don't even know what I just said in that last sentence. So, I think this is something to keep an eye on. So like I said before, this slide just talks about what I just said. Here's where I said, expect more physical stimulus programs with central banks acting to monetize debt. I think that's what you're going to see, especially in the West. This is something I threw in there at the end because it seems to be making a lot of inroads in 2019. I think it continues into 2020, especially in the West and the United States. Environmental, social, and governance. I got this definition off of Investopedia. It says environmental criteria consider how a company performs as a steward of nature. Social criteria examine how it manages relationships with employees, suppliers, customers, and communities where it operates. And governance deals with a company's leadership, executive pay, audits, internal controls, and shareholders' rights. This is all very nice, and I'm clapping very softly, golf clap. This is very nice, very, very lovely sounding. It's probably not conducive, though, to companies outperforming on the earnings front and then having their stock prices outperform. To caveat this, what I just said, that doesn't mean I think this is good or bad. I'm just telling you that if you focus, there's no discussion here on running the company for the benefit of the shareholders above all. And that's what I think should happen. The mother's milk of stock prices is earnings. If you're focusing on this stuff, how much time is being focused on running the actual business and creating better products and services and getting them to your customers and meeting your customers' needs? That's why corporations are formed. This to me is nothing but convergence towards social justice instead of focusing on profits and shareholder returns. This is where we're going in the West. This is part of the zeitgeist. This is part of the nice. Everybody wants to be nice. And that's fine. Profits won't be as high. I look at this as an excuse for managements to fail and not meet goals. That's what this will be. Yeah, we didn't meet our earnings and our sales are down and the products are being overtaken by our competitors. But, we did institute a new outreach program to various underserved classes so that we can get those people into our management ranks and diversify our thinking on how we run this company. Well, that's great. That a lot of people will probably like that, but where's the focus on getting your sales back up? I don't expect China and India and other emerging market countries to adopt this. I think this is just a continued, in my view, de-evolution of the West, decline of the West. We're living in a failed society, in my opinion, in the United States. This is a continuance of it. I don't care about any of this personally. A lot of people do, though, and a growing number of them do. and they won't care what I think. The majority will do what they think is correct, and that's fine. We have to recognize things for the way they are and not the way we want them to be. And I see this as being the prime governing doctrine going forward. I mean, you're seeing it all over the West. You have a country like Norway, for example, that single-handedly owes its prosperity to the hydrocarbon bounty that it has offshore in its offshore waters, and that it continues to exploit. And yet, the sovereign wealth fund in Norway is divesting itself of all hydrocarbon investments. I'll let you square that in your own mind. Killing the goose that laid the golden egg. That's ESG. I didn't have time to read it, and I didn't want to put it into this lecture, but I'll follow up with it in subsequent weekly videos. Evidently, there was a ruling by the Supreme Court in the Netherlands this last week where a lawsuit was brought against, I don't know if it was against oil and gas companies or the government itself, about climate goals, and that the Supreme Court in the Netherlands ruled that yes, in 2020 they have to meet certain goals. The goals, if they are to be met, will destroy the Dutch economy. But I guess this is where we're moving towards. Like I said, don't expect Russia, China, India, they're laughing. This is really, the West is being lost not by being outcompeted necessarily or outsmarted. It's we're self-combusting ourselves. We're pouring gas. We're standing in the middle of the street. We're going to make a point. We're going to pour gasoline on ourselves and light a match. That's what I think this is analogous to. And doesn't mean if I like it or don't like it, I can't change it. It seems like that's where we're heading. And don't expect the rest of the world. I mean, I find it interesting that Greta Thunberg, I keep picking on her, but I have to. What is she going to go to China and India? Those are the perpetrators of the most CO2 emissions in the world. They won't even let her in the country, folks. What are we going to do? We have the Chinese basically doing ethnic cleansing of their Uyghur population, their Muslim population. No one's doing anything about it. You've got Kyle Bass out there, ranting on and on about it. You think we're going to cut trade off with them, or we're going to sanction China, or what are we going to do? Threaten them with a war because they won't adopt ESG? I mean, they're just sitting back. These countries don't have to do anything, but just keep doing what they're doing, and we'll self-immolate. That's what we're doing. So that's what I think is happening. So you have to think about this in your investing. If you're for this, that's great. I'm not going to argue with you. I think this is where we're going. We're going to see more of this, and you have to invest and speculate accordingly. It's going to create tremendous amounts of opportunity. I think one of the greatest potential setups investments going forward, and I'll talk about this in subsequent videos also, is coal. Coal use is growing around the world. It doesn't matter what the United States says. If you want to have steel for your wind turbines, you need metallurgical coal to make coke so that you can take iron ore, mix it with coke, and create steel. Do the environmentalists understand that? What is the process that we're going to use to make steel if we're not going to use coking coal? None of this is answered because people don't even know what they're talking about. This will create opportunities. You can buy the coal ETF right now and get a 7 or 8% return. There's no investment being made in coal. No bank will finance a coal mine because of these ESG goals. Everybody's divesting themselves, but the need for the product doesn't go away. There's no substitute that I know about. Yes, you have electric arc furnaces that you can melt scrap steel in, and they work very well, but you can't create new steel from that process. And if you're going to have economic growth, which the Chinese and Indians and the rest of the 4.5 billion people around the world that are in the midst of entering the middle class want, then this consumption of these products is going up, yet the investment in new production is going down. This is the opportunity created by these ridiculous policies. So that's going to be an opportunity we'll be talking about over the next decade because it's going to be there. We're not going to change it, whether we like it or not. So we just, you accept things for the way they are, not the way they want you to be. And that's what a speculator does. He looks for the distortions caused by these type of things and then profits accordingly. That's the whole basis of the Actionable Intelligence Alert newsletter. So I've gone about 34 minutes. I think we've talked about a lot of things here. Like I said, not everything I talk about is going to come to fruition, obviously, Things change. All kinds of things that can't be foreseen will happen. Things that will shock us and surprise us. But that's kind of what I'm laying out going over the next year. What I think the trends are. And like I said, we'll follow up at the end of next year and see where we're at vis-a-vis these. I would like to hear in the comments section, what you guys are thinking about for next year. What are some of your prognostications? What do you think oil prices are going to do? Gold prices. What do you think? Are we finally going to see a turn in the uranium market? Are we going to be long suffering through 2020 and the recovery won't happen until 21 or 22? I'd like to hear about these things, and let's discuss them in the comment section. And if you disagree with me on some of these things, tell me why. If you want to call me names, that's fine too. I find it amusing. I think I do get a chuckle at some of the insults. They're pretty good. So this will be the last video until after Christmas. I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I am a believer in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I refuse to say happy holidays. The reason we have this holiday is to celebrate the birth of Christ. I really don't care if you like that or not. That's what it is. So if you choose to say happy holidays, that's fine. This is Merry Christmas, and to celebrate the birth of Christ. And I hope that your family, spend time with your family and enjoy the season of giving and receiving. So we'll talk to you after probably next weekend. I'll make another video before the new year, but we'll get back into the swing of things and move forward. So we'll talk to you next week, guys. Thanks.